Hi, Tim Sells here. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the announcement from the Direct Selling News that the Supreme Court ruled to limit the FTC powers. I'm going to interview my attorney. His name is James Colvin, and get his take on what this is about. James, good to see you, man.
Hey, Tim, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you for being on, first of all.
Absolutely.
So everyone in the audience, just so you have a little bit of history, he is my attorney. He has represented me in network marketing cases. I've referred him to a lot of people throughout the network marketing industry. And so I'm just really giving a validation to James. He's professional. He can sometimes hit a golf ball. All right. That's all I'll say. Give me your take on, number one, what the Direct Selling News stated.
They stated that the recent Supreme Court ruling has limited the FTC powers, but that's actually not what the Supreme Court stated. That's kind of where you get into murky waters with lay people interpreting legal decisions, especially Supreme Court decisions, which can be sometimes difficult to understand even for some attorneys. Essentially, what the Supreme Court has ruled is that from a jurisdictional aspect, that you can challenge an agency ruling in district court without having to go through the agency first. They have essentially teed it up to allow a court, probably either a district court is going to make the initial ruling, but it will probably be appealed to a circuit court of appeals and then go on up to the Supreme Court eventually. And they have kind of laid the groundwork through the dicta concurring opinions of Thomas and Gorsuch to essentially challenge the validity of FTC or any other agency for that matter, the rulings that come out of there and how you operate as a distributor or private individual or company within the context of an executive agency. It has a lot to do with the difference between Article 2 and Article 3 powers, separation of powers, also the limitation on private rights and the ability of executive agencies to limit those rights and the purview of the courts to determine personal property rights. But essentially, the FTC ruling comes down to the fact that you can challenge in district court the ability for the FTC to be a constitutionally appropriate venue to determine personal property rights.
Okay. People know me more as the person that breaks down and makes things simple. And so that you just said is beautiful, but I want to dig down into it and get an understanding. In the old days, there was, 4 or 5 people, a sheriff and a couple of deputies, and says, he's guilty, let's hang him. And then they would walk out and they would hang the guy. All right. That's simple.
Right.
And then there was levels of complexity because the wife says, no, it wasn't him, it was him. All right. So then the complexity begins to come in. So what I heard, district court, Supreme Court, all these different courts. So what does it mean in a simple cowboy term? What was adjudicated in this?
So the one sentence out of this case would be a private individual or a company can challenge the constitutionality of an executive agency in district court. So the FTC or the SEC, they would have exclusive jurisdiction to determine issues regarding the FTC, competition issues, the SEC trading issues. They have exclusive jurisdiction to adjudicate them. And now the Supreme Court is saying, if you're challenging the constitutionality of the FTC itself or the SEC itself, you can do that in district court. They have not decided whether the FTC or the SEC are constitutionally viable agencies. That would come next. And that's the avenue they've laid out for those issues to be determined, which will probably be issues in district court in Axon and Cochran. Those are going to go forward now.
To back up just a little bit, wasn't there a couple of companies involved that basically felt as though that their rights had been ignored, and that is the reason that they marched this up to the Supreme Court?
Well, basically what they were saying was because of the way executive agency administrative law judges are appointed, they have no accountability because it's nearly impossible to have them removed. And this is an executive agency. It's not a court under Article 3. It's an executive agency under Article 2. That's to do with Constitution and separation of powers. And because there is no check on their power, that they're unconstitutional is kind of the basic argument. And that's what they were saying. They weren't saying in the Axon case, they were buying a competitor, or the FTC stepped in and said, you can't buy a competitor because, it affects the marketplace. And now we're dealing with borderline antitrust issues. So he didn't say you can't make that decision, or Axon didn't say you can't make the decision on whether we're allowed to buy a competitor. They're saying you can't even talk to me about this because your agency is unconstitutional. And that's what went up, is whether they could challenge that in district court. And the Supreme Court said, yes, you can absolutely make that challenge in district court. And now that challenge can be made.
Okay. So some posse, and we'll call it the FTC, comes in and says, hey, you can't do this. And then this company basically took it up to the Supreme Court and saying, hey, that's not right. And then the Supreme Court more or less said, this shouldn't be here. You should be doing this in district court.
Right.
Okay.
In front of a judge, as opposed to a presidentially appointed administrative law judge.
Okay, thank you for all of that. In my understanding, and I'm questioning my understanding, why wouldn't they have gone straight to the district court, federal court in Utah, or any state that you wanted to take that to? So all states have a district court?
Yes, at least one. So like here in Oklahoma, we have 3. Where I live in Tulsa, it's the Northern District for Oklahoma.
Okay. They basically, the Supreme Court said, okay, so you do this in your state.
Well, in federal court within your state, yeah.
Okay. All right. And how is the judges decided in the district court? Who appoints, or are they voted in? How is that person put?
How do you become a judge in federal court?
Yeah.
You are nominated by a United States senator, and you go through the confirmation process, effectively appointed by the president for a lifetime term. It's subject to impeachment and removal via that avenue.
Okay. I read an article and it was basically talking about this, and it was that the FTC would set up an administrative judge, going back to this posse. I'm best friends with James Colvin and I want to hang this guy, and so I'm going to appoint you as my judge. And so then I say, hey, man, this guy's a scoundrel. You know he's a scoundrel. And so you're going to say, yes, he's a scoundrel, and bam, yeah, you can hang him. So that's the kind of the way that I viewed what this person was saying. Is that kind of like what could happen in an FTC appointing a judge, and then they go out and then they say, these guys are scoundrels?
Yeah, I mean, essentially the way it's set up right now is the FTC would be the prosecuting arm. So let's just, for ease of use a federal crime. If there's a federal crime, you would have a federal prosecutor under one roof, you would have the judge under one roof, and then you'd have the defense counsel under a different roof. Even if it's a federal prosecutor or federal defender, they're under a different roof, right? Well, after the trial is over, it gets kicked up to an appellate court, and then they review everything that happened. In the case of a typical FTC issue, there'd be an administrative law judge. He's a member of the FTC. And then you would have the FTC personnel who would be prosecuting the matter. They're also within the FTC. And then the FTC is going to internally review it. And then after that, you have a federal appellate court, like in Utah and Oklahoma, the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals would look at it. Well, so they basically have, out of the 3 arms, prosecute, defense, and tribunal, they have 2 out of the 3 under one roof. And so there could potentially be some bias there. If you look at what the judges said, Thomas and Gorsuch in their concurring opinions, I mean, they kind of cited some statistics saying basically the FTC, if you're in there, you're going to get an adverse ruling, or you can settle with them, which is going to be on terms that are less likely to be enforced if you go all the way through the trial process. So it's heavily in their favor. And I think where a lot of the people are reading into this about limiting the FTC's powers or other executive agencies' powers, is the concurring opinions by Thomas and Gorsuch basically say they shouldn't be allowed to do this. But those opinions don't effectively limit any of their powers at this point. It still has to go through the next stage of the litigation process. What this ruling does is say you can challenge the constitutionality of these agencies in district court, and now those challenges have to be done.
All right, appreciate it. So if you haven't already, if you like this kind of content and you want more of it, please subscribe. Drop a comment down below. Let us know your thoughts on the FTC. And so appreciate you so much for watching.